It was a Tuesday morning when the world changed forever. The sun was rising over Fort Liberty in North Carolina, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Birds sang in the trees. Soldiers went about their morning routines. Everything was normal, peaceful, ordinary. Then the sky turned red. Danny Reyes was underground when it happened. He was a sergeant, 34 years old, with tired eyes and rough hands. He had spent 2 tours overseas and had seen enough violence to last a lifetime. That morning he was checking supply inventory in the basement storage area. It was boring work, but someone had to do it. The first explosion shook the ground so hard that boxes fell from the shelves. Danny grabbed a support beam to keep himself from falling. The lights flickered, then went out. Emergency red lights came on a moment later. He heard screaming from somewhere above, then more explosions, one after another, so close together they sounded like thunder. That would not stop. Danny grabbed his rifle and ran for the stairs. His heart was pounding, his training kicked in, and his mind became sharp and focused. He did not know what was happening, but he knew it was bad. When he reached the surface, he stopped and stared. The base was on fire. Buildings that had stood for decades were now piles of burning rubble. Soldiers ran in every direction, some carrying wounded friends, others firing weapons at the sky, and in that sky, blocking out the morning sun, were ships. They were enormous. Each one was bigger than an aircraft carrier, shaped like sharp black triangles with no visible windows or markings. They hung in the air without any sound, without any visible engines. They were so large and so strange that Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's brains struggled to understand what he was seeing. Then one of the ships fired a beam of bright blue light shot down from its belly. Where it touched the ground, everything disappeared, not exploded, not burned. Just gone, a perfect circle of nothing. Where a building had stood moments before, Danny felt something he had not felt in years. Fear, real deep, bone-shaking fear. He ran across the world. The same scene played out in 1,000 different places. Military bases, government buildings, power plants, communication centers, all were struck in the first hour. The attacks were precise and devastating. Whatever these invaders were, they knew exactly where to hit. In Washington, D.C., the Pentagon was gone. The White House was a smoking crater, but deep underground, a bunker built to survive nuclear war. General Patricia Cole was still alive. She was 61 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen every kind of crisis. She had served her country for 40 years. She had helped plan wars, end conflicts, and negotiate peace. Nothing in her long career had prepared her for this, but she was not the kind of woman who gave up around her. Officers scrambled to make sense of the chaos. Communication lines were down across the country. Satellite feeds showed the same nightmare everywhere. Those black ships, those blue beams, that endless destruction. What are we dealing with? She asked, her voice calm and steady. Young officer looked up from his screen. His face was pale. General, we don't know. The ships don't match anything. Our databases, the technology is it's not from Earth. Patricia Cole had considered many threats in her career. Nuclear war, terrorism, cyber attacks. She had never seriously considered aliens. Few people in the military did. It seemed like something from movies, not real life, but the evidence was burning Across her screens, "Get me whoever is." Still standing, she said, "Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Anyone with a weapon and the will to fight. We're not done yet." 6 hours after the first attack, the invaders made contact. Every screen on Earth, every phone, every television, every computer suddenly showed the same image. A face appeared, though it was not a human face. The creature had gray skin, stretched tight over a skull-shaped head. Its eyes were large and completely black like pools of oil. When it spoke, its mouth did not match the words which came through in perfect English. "I am High Sovereign Kathran of the Voreth Collective. Your world has been selected for integration into our empire. This process is not negotiable. You have 72 hours to surrender all military forces and submit to our authority. If you comply, the transition will be peaceful. If you resist, you will be cleansed from this planet." This is not a threat. It is simply what will happen. Choose wisely. The screen went black. Danny Reyes watched the message on a phone he had taken from a dead soldier. He was hiding in a drainage ditch 2 miles from what was left of the base. Around him, a small group of survivors had gathered. Some were wounded. All were scared. One of them, a young private with blood on his face, looked at Danny with desperate eyes. "What do we do, Sergeant? What the hell do we do?" Danny looked at the sky. Those massive ships were still there, blocking out the stars that were beginning to appear as night fell. They were so powerful, so advanced, so utterly beyond anything humanity had ever built. But Danny had spent his whole life fighting against impossible odds. He had grown up poor in a small Texas town where nobody expected him to become anything. He had survived 2 wars that had killed better men than him. He had buried friends and carried their memories every single day. He was tired, he was scared, but he was not ready to give up. "We survived," Danny said. "We find others, we fight back." The young private shook his head. "Fight back with what? Did you see those ships?" "We can't fight that." Danny looked at him, and something hard appeared in his eyes. "People have been telling me what I can't do my whole life. I stopped listening a long time ago." He stood up and checked his rifle. It was an old M4, the same kind he had carried overseas. Simple, reliable, human. "Anyone who wants to live, follow me. Anyone who wants to surrender, stay here and wait for those things to find you. But I'm not kneeling for anyone. Not today, not ever." He started walking into the darkness. One by one, the others followed across the world, in basements and bunkers and mountain hideouts. Similar scenes were unfolding. The Voreth expected surrender. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, and every single species had submitted once they saw the power of the collective. But they had never met humans before. They had never faced a species that had spent its entire history fighting against impossible odds, struggling against nature and each other, surviving ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. They had never encountered creatures who saw surrender as worse than death. The 72 hours came and went. No surrender came. The Voreth were confused. Then they were annoyed. Then slowly they began to realize they had made a terrible mistake. The war for Earth had begun. The Voreth collective had conquered 217 worlds across 40,000 years. Their methods were simple and effective. They would arrive with overwhelming force, destroy military targets, and demand surrender. Every species they had encountered followed the same pattern: shock, fear, submission. Humans did not follow the pattern. High Sovereign Kethan stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching reports come in from across the planet. His black eyes narrowed as he read the numbers. In the 3 weeks since the deadline had passed, his ground forces had suffered over 4,000 casualties. 4,000 soldiers lost to a species that had not even achieved interstellar travel. It was embarrassing. It was confusing. It was, for the first time in Cathron's long career, genuinely concerning. They are using primitive projectile weapons. One of his advisors reported chemical propellants launching metal fragments. Our energy shields are not designed for such attacks. Cathan turned to look at him. Explain. Our shields deflect plasma and laser fire. They were designed for warfare against civilized species. These humans are using weapons that were obsolete in our culture before we achieved space flight. The projectiles are too small and too fast for our shields to recognize as threats. Cathran processed this information. For 40,000 years, the Voreth had fought enemies who used energy weapons. They had perfected defenses against beams and bolts and directed radiation. No one had thought to defend against something as primitive as a bullet. It was almost funny if it was not so deadly. Danny Reyes crouched behind a fallen tree, watching the Voreth patrol. Through his rifle scope, there were 6 of them, tall and thin, with gray skin and those disturbing black eyes. They moved stiffly like insects, their long limbs bending at strange angles. He had learned a lot about them in the past few weeks. He had learned that they died just like anything else when you put a bullet in the right place. Beside him, Corporal Maria Santos checked her own weapon. She was 30 years old, with dark hair tied back in a tight bun and a scar across her chin from a knife fight in her youth. She had been a medic before the invasion, but she had learned to kill just as well as she had learned to heal. 6 targets, she whispered. You take the 3 on the left, I take the right. Danny nodded. On my mark. They had picked up others along the way. Kevin Marsh was a 19-year-old communications specialist who had been on his first week of active duty when the world ended. He was scared most of the time, but he refused to run. He was positioned 50 m away, ready to provide covering fire. And then there was Dr. Helen Park. She was a civilian, a xenobiologist who had been consulting with the military when the invasion began. She was not a soldier, but she was possibly the most valuable person in their group. She had studied the Voreth, learned their biology, found their weaknesses. Danny studied his breathing, marked 6 shots, rang out in quick succession. 6 Voreth fell. Kevin and LT Unc and GT's voice came through the radio, clear. No reinforcements incoming. They moved quickly, collecting weapons and supplies from the fallen aliens. Helen knelt beside one of the bodies, examining it with scientific interest, even as others might have felt only disgust. Look at this, she said, pointing to the wound in the creature's chest. The exoskeleton cracked like an eggshell. They're built for flexibility, not strength. Their bodies are adapted for low-gravity environments. Danny crouched beside her. What does that mean? For us, it means they're physically weaker than humans. Our muscles are denser, our bones are stronger. We evolved on a heavy-gravity world with harsh conditions. They evolved somewhere Gentler, she looked up at him with something like hope in her eyes. One-on-one without their technology, we could beat them with our bare hands. This information spread through the resistance networks like wildfire. Humans were stronger, humans were tougher, the aliens bled, the aliens died, they could be beaten. In Chicago, a retired mechanic named Lou Grady had organized his neighborhood into a fighting force. Before the invasion, he had been a quiet man who spent his weekends fixing old cars and watching football. Now he led raids against Voreth supply convoys using homemade explosives and hunting rifles. His group had started with 12 people, now it numbered over 200. In rural Montana, community of hunters and farmers had turned their land into a fortress. They knew the mountains better than any alien ever could. Voreth patrols went into those mountains and did not come out. In cities and towns across the world, ordinary people became warriors. Teachers and doctors and bus drivers picked up weapons and learned to fight. Parents defended their children with kitchen knives and baseball bats. Grandparents who had survived old wars taught young people how to make bombs. From household chemicals, the Voreth had expected to fight an army. Instead, they were fighting a species. General Patricia Cole coordinated what she could from her underground bunker. Communication was difficult but not impossible. Ham radio operators, satellite phones, even old telegraph lines, humans found ways to talk to each other. She received Helen Park's report about Voreth biology and immediately saw its importance. She ordered it distributed to every resistance cell they could contact. They came here thinking we were primitive. She told her staff they thought our weapons were obsolete. Let's show them how wrong they were. The Voreth began to adapt. They brought heavier armor. They started traveling in larger groups. They learned to fear the sound of human weapons, but for every tactic they developed, humans developed a counter. Heavier armor meant slower movement, which meant easier ambushes. Larger groups meant bigger targets for improvised explosives. The aliens were fighting a war they had never trained for against an enemy that refused to follow any rules they understood. Dies. Group grew. 20 became 50. 50 became 100. They operated in the mountains of North Carolina, striking Voreth positions and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. One night, sitting around a small fire in a hidden camp, Kevin Marsh asked the question that was on everyone's mind: do you think we can actually win this? Danny stared into the flames. 3 weeks ago, he had watched his base burn. He had seen weapons that could erase buildings from existence. He had faced an enemy from the stars with nothing but a rifle and determination. I don't know if we can win, he said. Honestly, but I know we can make them bleed. I know we can make them pay for every inch of ground they take, and I know that as long as we're fighting, we haven't lost. Maria nodded. My grandmother survived a civil war when she was a child. She told me stories about hiding in the mountains, about fighting with almost nothing. She said, the one thing you can never let them take is your will to resist. Helen looked up at the stars, at the dark shapes of Voreth ships passing overhead. They've conquered hundreds of worlds. They've never failed. They don't know how to fail. A small smile crossed her face. I think we're about to teach them. Somewhere above them, high Sovereign Kethan was reaching the same Conclusion. He looked at the casualty reports at the maps showing red dots of resistance, spreading like a disease across the planet. He had been a military commander. For 300 years, he had never seen anything like this. These humans were not more advanced. They were not smarter or better equipped, but they had something his soldiers lacked, a fire in them that would not go out, stubbornness that bordered on madness. He began for the first time to wonder if he had underestimated them. 6 weeks into the invasion, the Vorath controlled the skies. Their ships patrolled every continent. Their weapons could strike anywhere on the planet within minutes. By every measure of traditional warfare, they had won, but they could not hold the ground. Every city they occupied became a battleground. Every road they traveled became an ambush site. Every night brought new attacks, new explosions, new casualties. Their soldiers were afraid to sleep. Their officers were afraid to leave their fortified positions. High Sovereign Cathron studied the maps in his command center. Red markers showed areas of active resistance. 6 weeks ago, there had been a few dozen. Now there were thousands. They spread across every continent like drops of blood seeping through fabric. How is this possible? He demanded. We control their communications. We destroyed their governments. We eliminated their military command structure. His chief advisor shifted uncomfortably. The humans do not require central command, High Sovereign. They organize themselves, small groups operating independently, sharing information. Through primitive means we cannot intercept, then intercept them manually. Find their leaders and destroy them. We have tried. When we kill one leader, another takes their place, often several others. It is as if destroying them makes them multiply. Cathan felt something he had not experienced in decades. Frustration. In the Carolina mountains, Danny Reyes had become exactly the kind of leader the Vorath could not understand. He did not command from safety. He fought alongside his people. He carried the same weapons, ate the same food, slept on the same cold ground. His unit had grown to nearly 150 fighters. Some were soldiers like him, survivors of destroyed bases and scattered units. Others were civilians who had never held a weapon before the invasion. It did not matter. Everyone learned. Everyone fought. General Cole's voice crackled through the radio one evening. The connection was weak, bounced through a dozen relay stations to avoid detection. Sergeant Reyes, I have a mission for you. High priority. Danny listened carefully as she explained. The Vorath had established a forward command post in the ruins of Atlanta. It coordinated all their operations across the southeastern region. If it was destroyed, their forces would be blind and confused for weeks. It's heavily defended. Cole warned, this won't be like your hit-and-run raids. This will be a full assault. Danny looked at his people gathered around the fire. Maria was cleaning her rifle. Kevin was helping Helen organize medical supplies. Others were eating, talking quietly, trying to find moments of normalcy in the chaos. We'll do it, he said. They moved at night, traveling through forests and abandoned towns, avoiding Vorath patrols. It took 4 days to reach the outskirts of Atlanta. The city was a ghost. Buildings stood empty and dark. Cars sat abandoned in the streets, covered in dust and ash. The Vorath had not destroyed Atlanta. They had simply emptied it, forcing the population into camps outside the city. The command post was in what had been a sports stadium. The Vorath had reinforced it with their own materials, adding strange metal structures and pulsing energy shields. Hundreds of soldiers patrolled its perimeter. Danny studied it through binoculars. Helen, talk to me. What are we looking at? Helen pointed to different sections of the structure. The shields are strongest at the main entrances, but see those vents along the upper level. They're exhaust ports for their cooling systems. The shields don't cover them. They can't, or the systems would overheat. Can we get in through there? It'll be tight. And once we're inside, we'll need to reach the central command hub. That's where their communications equipment will be. Danny nodded slowly. We split into 3 groups. First group creates a diversion at the main gate. Second group provides covering fire. Third group goes through the vents. Maria stepped forward. I'm going through the vents with you. I need you leading the covering fire team. No, her voice was firm. Someone needs to watch your back in there. Kevin can lead the covering fire. I'm coming with you. Danny saw the look in her eyes. He had learned not to argue with that look. The attack began at midnight. The first explosion lit up the sky. A truck packed with homemade explosives driven into the main gate. The Vorath responded immediately. Soldiers pouring out of the stadium to meet the threat. That was when the second group opened fire from the surrounding buildings. Bullets rained down on the confused aliens, forcing them to take cover, drawing more and more soldiers away from the structure. Danny led the third group, just 15 people. All that could fit through the vents up the side of the stadium. They moved quickly and quietly, climbing the damaged walls. Finding the exhaust ports Helen had identified, the vents were tight, barely wide enough for a human body. They crawled through darkness, the metal hot against their hands and knees, the sound of battle muffled below them. They emerged in a maintenance corridor. 2 Vorath guards stood nearby. Danny and Maria killed them before they could raise an alarm. This way, Helen whispered, checking a stolen Vorath data tablet. The command hub is 2 levels down. They fought their way through the structure. Every corner brought new enemies, new battles, new deaths. Danny watched 3 of his people fall in the first 5 minutes, then 2 more, then another, but they kept moving. They could not stop. They could not fail. The command hub was a massive room filled with glowing screens and humming machines. A dozen Vorath technicians worked at consoles, coordinating operations across 4 states. When Danny and LT Unk and GT Y's team burst through the door, they looked up with those black eyes wide with surprise. The fight was brutal and short. When it was over, Danny stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. 7 of his 15 people had survived. Maria was wounded, a plasma burn across her left shoulder that had blackened her armor and blistered the skin beneath. She refused to sit down. Helen, Danny said, do what you need to do. Helen moved to the main console. Her fingers flew across the alien interface. She had spent weeks studying captured Vorath technology, learning their systems. I'm downloading everything. Communications, codes, patrol schedules, supply routes. This is incredible. How long? 3 minutes. They did not have 3 minutes. The door exploded inward. Vorath soldiers poured through, firing energy weapons that scorched the air. Danny and LT Unk and GT Wise people took cover behind consoles and equipment. Returning fire. Kevin and LT Unk and GT's voice came through the radio, strained with effort. We can't hold them outside much longer. There are too many. You need to get out now. Almost there, Helen shouted. 9 seconds. Danny looked at his remaining fighters. They were exhausted, wounded, nearly out of ammunition. They had already given so much. They would give more. He grabbed a Voreth energy weapon from a dead technician. He did not know exactly how it worked, but he figured it out quickly enough. Hold this position, he ordered, whatever it takes. The next 90 seconds were the longest of his life. He fired until the energy weapon ran dry, then switched to his rifle, then to his pistol. Maria fought beside him, her wounded arm hanging useless at her side, shooting with her remaining hand. Done. Helen yanked a data chip from the console. I have everything. They ran. The escape was chaos. Danny carried wounded fighter over his shoulder. Maria covered their retreat, emptying magazine after magazine into pursuing aliens. They burst through a window, dropped 2 stories to the ground, and sprinted for the darkness beyond the stadium lights. Behind them, the charges they had planted detonated. The command hub disappeared in a ball of fire that lit up the night sky. They regrouped 3 mi away in the basement of an abandoned church. Of the 150 people who had started this mission, 43 had returned. The others were dead or missing. Danny sat against a wall, too tired to stand. His hands were shaking, his body ached in places he did not know could ache. Maria sat beside him. Her shoulder was bandaged now, Helen having worked on it with what little medical supplies they had. She did not speak. She just sat there, alive, breathing. Kevin approached them slowly. Sergeant, the data Helen recovered, General Cole says it's everything we hoped for and more. She says this is a turning point. Danny nodded. He thought of the 17 dog tags in his pocket. 17 people who would never see the turning point. Then it was worth it, he said quietly. It has to be worth it. Outside, the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Somewhere in orbit, High Sovereign Cathron was learning that his southeastern command structure had just gone dark. For the first time in his long career, he felt something very close to fear. The humans were not just surviving, they were fighting back, and they were winning. 3 months after the invasion began, High Sovereign Cathran stood before the Supreme Council of the Voreth Collective. The council chamber was vast and cold, located on a station orbiting a dead star thousands of light years from Earth. The 5 members of the council watched him with expressionless black eyes. Explain yourself, the eldest counselor demanded. You were given the finest fleet in the collective. You were sent to subjugate a primitive world that had not even achieved interstellar travel. Yet your casualty reports grow longer. Each day, Cathan had prepared for this moment. He had known it was coming. Honored Council, the humans are unlike any species we have encountered. They do not respond to fear as other species do. They do not calculate odds or measure costs when faced with certain defeat. They do not surrender, they fight. Harder. Absurd, another counselor said. All species follow the same patterns. Self-preservation is the foundation of intelligent behavior, not for them. Cathan activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air, scenes from the invasion. humans charging Vorath. Positions with weapons that had no chance of penetrating their armor. Humans throwing themselves on grenades to save their companions, humans fighting with rocks and sticks when they ran out of ammunition. I have seen soldiers who should have retreated continue to advance. I have seen wounded warriors refuse evacuation. I have seen civilians with no military training attack armed soldiers because they would rather die than submit. Keithan paused. They call it courage. I call it madness, but whatever it is, it makes them dangerous. The council was silent for a long moment. What do you recommend? The eldest counselor finally asked. Keithan straightened his posture. I recommend the extinction protocol. We cannot hold this planet with conventional forces. The humans are too many, too determined, and too adaptive. If we cannot control them, we must eliminate them. The extinction protocol was the Vorath's final solution for troublesome worlds. Biological weapons designed to attack specific genetic markers. Once deployed, they would spread through the atmosphere, the water, the soil. Every human on Earth would die within weeks. The planet itself would be rendered uninhabitable for centuries. The council deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they approved the request. On Earth, the resistance intercepted the transmission. General Patricia Cole sat in her bunker, reading the decoded message on her screen. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady when she spoke. They're bringing weapons of extinction, biological agents that will kill every human being on the planet. She looked around at her staff, at the tired faces of men and women who had fought so hard for so long. We have approximately 2 weeks before the weapons arrive. Can we stop them? Someone asked. Not in space. We don't have the capability to intercept their ships. Cole stood up, walked to a map of the world that covered one wall. But Dr. Park believes she can disable the weapons remotely if we can capture a Vorath ship with intact command systems. She pointed to a location in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. 6 days ago, a Vorath carrier crashed here after being damaged by anti-aircraft fire. Our scouts report it's largely intact but heavily guarded. The Vorath are trying to repair it. If we can take that ship, Cole continued, Dr. Park thinks she can access their central network, find the codes to deactivate the biological weapons before they deploy. That's a lot of ifs. An officer said quietly. Cole nodded. It is, but it's also our only chance. She pressed a button on her console. Get me Sergeant Reyes. Danny received the orders 3 hours later. His unit was still recovering from the Atlanta mission. They had lost too many people, gained too few replacements, but there was no one else close enough, experienced enough, or crazy enough to attempt this mission. He gathered his people and told them the truth. He told them about the extinction protocol. He told them what would happen if they failed. He told them that this mission was likely suicide. Anyone who wants to walk away, I understand. No judgment. You've already given more than anyone could ask. No one walked away. They moved fast, covering ground that should have taken weeks in just 4 days. They slept in shifts, ate while walking, pushed their bodies beyond exhaustion. Maria's shoulder was not fully healed, but she kept up with everyone else. Kevin had become a different person since the invasion, harder, quieter, more capable. Helen Park rode with them, her scientific equipment packed in a stolen Vorath hover vehicle she had. Spent months studying their technology. She was as ready as she would ever be. The crashed carrier was enormous. A ship designed to transport thousands of soldiers across the galaxy. It had come down in a valley, carving a massive trench in the earth. Vorath engineers swarmed over its hull like insects. Welding and repairing, Danny studied the scene through binoculars. Helen, what are we looking at? The main engineering section is intact. That's where the command systems will be. We need to get inside, fight our way to the central computer core, and give me enough time to access their network. How much time? Unknown. Could be minutes, could be hours. There. Encryption is complex. Danny lowered the binoculars. Hundreds of Vorath soldiers guarded the ship. His unit numbered less than 50. The mathematics were not in their favor, but mathematics had never stopped them before. We go in at dawn, he said. Hit them when the light is in their eyes. The attack began with fire. They had spent the night preparing, planting charges along the valley walls, positioning fighters in hidden locations, creating a kill zone that would make the Vorath pay for every step. When the first explosions went off, Danny was already moving. His team, Maria, Kevin, Helen, and a dozen others, ran toward the ship while the rest of the unit provided covering fire. They reached the hull and found an open hatch. Inside the ship was a maze of corridors and chambers lit by flickering emergency lights. Vorath crew members appeared around every corner, and every corner brought another fight. Kevin fell first. He took a plasma bolt to the chest while clearing a room. He lived long enough to see the room was clear, to know his death had meant something. Keep moving, Danny ordered, his voice rough with grief. We can't stop. They pushed deeper into the ship. Half of Danny and LT, Unk, and GT Y's team was gone by the time they reached the engineering section. Maria was wounded again, this time in the leg. She limped but did not slow down. The command core was a vast chamber filled with machinery Danny could not understand. Screens covered the walls, displaying information in the alien language. In the center stood a massive pillar of pulsing light, the ship's main computer. Helen, do your thing. Helen ran to a console and began working. Her fingers moved across the alien interface with practiced familiarity. I'm in accessing their network, looking for the weapons protocols. Vorath reinforcements arrived faster than expected. They poured through every entrance, firing energy weapons that turned the air to fire. Danny and LT, Unk, and GT Y's remaining fighters took cover behind machinery and equipment, returning fire. One by one they fell. Soon it was just Danny, Maria, and two others holding the door. Then just Danny and Maria. Then just Danny. Maria was on the ground, her leg wound having finally given out. She was still firing, propped against a console, but Danny could see she was fading. Helen, how much longer? Almost there. I found the weapons codes. I just need to. A Vorath soldier appeared behind her. Danny shot it, but not before it fired. Helen screamed as the blast caught her arm. She kept working. Her left arm hung useless, burned nearly to the bone, but her right hand still moved. Across the console, Danny stood in the doorway alone. Vorath soldiers filled the corridor beyond. He had one magazine left, 15 bullets. There were at least 30 aliens. He thought about his mother, who had died when he was 17. He thought about his father, who who had never told him. He was proud of him. He thought about Maria bleeding on the floor behind him. He thought about Kevin, who had been so scared but had never run. He raised his rifle. "Come on then," he said quietly. "Let's see how many of you I can take." With me, the Vorath charged. Danny fired. Bodies fell. He lost count of how many he killed. 8, 10, 12. Then his rifle clicked empty. He drew his knife. The first Vorath that reached him died with human steel in its throat. The second died when Danny snapped its neck. The third died when he took its own weapon and turned it against it. He was wounded now, plasma burns and cuts covering his body. He did not feel them. He felt nothing but the cold determination that had kept him alive through everything. "Done." Helen's voice was weak but triumphant. "I've transmitted the deactivation codes. The weapons will shut down remotely. They can't stop it." Danny killed another Vorath, then another. He was running on nothing but will. His body screamed for him to stop, to fall, to give up. He did not give up. The remaining Vorath hesitated. They looked at this single human covered in blood, surrounded by the bodies of their comrades still fighting. Something in their black eyes flickered. Something that might have been fear. Then Maria's voice came from behind him. "Danny, it's done. It's over." He stood there swaying on his feet. The knife dropped from his fingers. The world began to go gray at the edges. He saw Maria crawling toward him. He saw Helen slumped over her console. He saw the Vorath pulling back, retreating, confused by an enemy they simply could not understand. Then he saw nothing at all. Danny Reyes woke up in a field hospital 3 days later. His body was wrapped in bandages. Machines beeped softly beside his bed. For a long moment, he did not know where he was or how he had gotten there. Then Maria's face appeared above him. "Hey there, hero," she said softly. Her arm was in a sling, her leg bandaged, but she was smiling. "Welcome back, Helen." D and LT Unk and GTY's voice was a rough whisper. "Alive. Lost her arm, but she's already complaining about not being able to work fast enough. Doctors say she'll be fine." Danny closed his eyes. Relief washed over him like warm water. The mission complete. Success. The extinction weapons deactivated in orbit before they could deploy. General Cole says you saved the entire human race. Maria paused. "They've put you in for every medal they can think of. Not that medals mean much anymore." Danny tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his body from a dozen different wounds. The Vorath. Maria's smile grew wider. "That's the best part. Lie back and listen." Across the world, everything had changed. The deactivation of the extinction weapons had not just saved humanity, it had broken the Vorath spirit. For the first time in 40,000 years they had failed. Their ultimate weapon had been turned against them by a species they considered primitive, and humanity had not stopped fighting. General Cole's coordinated global offensive was the largest military operation in human history. Resistance cells on 6 continents attacked simultaneously. Captured Vorath weapons were turned against their makers. Civilian pilots flew patched-together aircraft against alien interceptors. Farmers and teachers and office workers picked up rifles and charged fortified positions. The Vorath, already demoralized, could not adapt quickly enough. Their commanders had spent thousands of years winning easy victories. They did not know how to handle defeat. They did not know how to fight an enemy that grew stronger with every setback. In Asia, a coalition of survivors overran a Voreth supply depot, capturing enough weapons to arm an entire army. In Europe, resistance fighters destroyed a communication hub that blinded alien forces across the continent. In Africa, South America, Australia, everywhere, humans rose up. High Sovereign Cathron watched his empire crumble. He stood on the bridge of his command ship, surrounded by screens, showing disaster after disaster. His fleet was in chaos. His ground forces were being overwhelmed. 40,000 years of conquest in this single primitive world was destroying everything. High Sovereign, his advisor said quietly, the council has authorized retreat. Cathron did not respond immediately. He stared at the blue and green planet on his main screen. Such a small world, such a seemingly weak species. They had no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields, no plasma weapons. By every measure the Voreth used, they should have been easy prey, but they were not weak. They had never been weak. The Voreth had simply failed to understand what true strength looked like. Begin withdrawal. Cathan ordered. All ships, all forces, leave this world. Leave this world. As his fleet began to lift away from Earth, Cathan composed a message. It was not addressed to the council or to his fellow commanders. It was addressed to the archives, to be stored in the permanent records of the Voreth collective. He spoke of what he had witnessed. He described the humans in detail, their biology, their psychology, their strain and terrible determination. He explained how they had fought against impossible odds, how they had refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice, how they had turned their own primitiveness into a weapon. And he concluded with a recommendation. Earth was to be designated a quarantine zone. No Voreth ship should approach within 50 light years of its sun. The species that lived there was not to be disturbed, provoked, or contacted in any way. Let them have their small world. Catherine wrote, let them keep their violent nature contained, because if they ever develop the technology to travel the stars, if they ever bring that determination and that fury to the wider galaxy, then may the gods help us all. On Earth, people emerged from hiding to watch the alien ships rise into the sky. In cities and villages, in mountains and deserts, humans looked up and saw their enemies fleeing. There was no celebration. Not yet. The cost had been too high. Millions were dead. Cities lay in ruins. Entire regions had been rendered uninhabitable by the fighting. The world would spend generations recovering from what had happened, but humanity had survived. More than survived, they had won. Danny Reyes was released from the hospital 2 weeks after the last Voreth ship left Earth's atmosphere. He walked slowly, still healing, still weak, but he walked. Maria met him at the door. Helen was there too, her missing arm replaced by an empty sleeve pinned to her shoulder. Kevin's parents had come to see him, to thank the man who had served alongside their son. At the end, what now? Maria asked as they stepped outside into the sunlight. Danny looked up at the sky. It was blue and clear. No dark shapes blocking the sun. No alien ships casting shadows over the world. Just clouds and birds and the promise of better days. Now we rebuild, he said. And we remember. He traveled back to Texas, to the small town where he had Grown up, much of it was gone, destroyed. In the early days of the invasion, but some buildings still stood. His mother's house was one of them. He found her garden in the backyard, overgrown and wild. After months of neglect, he spent a week clearing it, pulling weeds, turning soil, planting new seeds. It was simple work, quiet work. After everything he had done, everything he had survived, it felt good to create something instead of destroy. Maria visited him there. Sometimes they did not talk much. They had seen too much together for words to carry much meaning. They sat on the porch and watched the sunset, two survivors finding peace in each other's company. Helen Park became the head of a new global initiative to study and understand the technology the Voreth had left behind. She traveled the world, working with scientists from every nation, turning the weapons of their enemies into tools for rebuilding. General Cole retired from military service. She had given everything she had to the war effort. Now she wanted to spend whatever years remained to her, helping her country heal. And across the world, in thousands of places, similar stories unfolded. Soldiers returned home, families reunited. Communities began the slow process of putting themselves back together. It would take decades, it would take generations. The scars of the invasion would never fully heal, but humanity had proven something to the universe. They had shown every watching civilization, every species that might one day look toward Earth, what happened when you attacked their world. They had demonstrated that humans were not cattle to be conquered, not resources to be harvested, not primitives to be subjugated. They were survivors. They were fighters. They were dangerous. On a quiet evening, Danny Ray sat on his mother's porch, watching the stars come out. He thought about Kevin, about all the people he had lost, about the friends who would never see this peaceful sky. He thought about the dog tag still in his pocket. 17 names, 17 people who had given everything. Was it worth it? Maria asked softly from beside him. Danny considered the question. He looked at the stars, at the clear and quiet sky, at the world that still existed because ordinary people had refused to give up. They're still up there, he said. The Voreth, other species too, probably looking at us, wondering what we are. He reached over and took Maria's hand. And now they know. Now they'll think twice before coming back. That's worth something. That's worth everything. Maria leaned her head against his shoulder. The night was warm. The stars were bright. Somewhere far away in the depths of space, civilizations were spreading the word about the strange and terrible species on the third planet from an unremarkable yellow star, the species that did not know how to surrender, the species that fought back. Danny closed his eyes and let himself feel for the first time in months something like hope. The sky was clear, the war was over, and humanity had earned its place among the stars.